Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Thompson, along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron, I got to see you. How are you doing?
In real life, yeah.
In
I
real
feel like
life.
it feels like it's been too long since I've seen it. And then now we have the surprise Monday night, right? It's Monday night
Yeah,
right now.
it is technically.
Podcast. So changing things up. You know I'm a creature of habit and you're screwing me up, making me leave my house to actually go see real people, and then we're doing it on a Monday night. But that goes to show you, Greg, how much I love you. And I was very happy that you brought me along. If nobody knows or didn't see on Twitter, we went over to Buffalo Chop House for Greg to collect his winnings from our friend Drew at the Rock Power Report, and it was a fun night. Lots of fun stories. Got to hang out with you guys outside of the digital world, and it's fun to not communicate just over Twitter.
Yeah, it was great, and it really was a great time. I had a lovely meal, so everyone, please go to @RockPowerReport and tell them thank you on my behalf for the delightful 32-ounce bone-in ribeye.
Thank you, Brian Dable.
That we delighted, and it was because of Brian Dable, and because of that, I sent Drew a thank you potato, and on the potato it said thank you on behalf of myself and Brian Dable for a lovely dinner. And I think that you should be appreciative when things like that happen. So, but back to normal. I am traveling for work now again, and traveling for business is weird, and I didn't know how things would work with all the connections and everything there, so we thought that rather than roll the dice from a hotel room, we would just switch up the nights and go with some Monday Night Madness here and see how things roll.
Yeah, no, this actually works out really well for me this week, so it was a good transition, but I think we'll be able to probably get you back to normal even with all the travel and stay consistent here going forward for you.
Yeah, hopefully. So tonight's show, obviously, as we've been working our way through the position previews, we've gone through our cornerbacks, our safeties, and we've had the chance to bring on some of the Cover One talent that is doing work throughout the Twitter sphere. That tonight we are going to be bringing on our fine gentleman, Mr. Kyle Silagyi. How we doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. It's nice to have you aboard Cover One. It's been fantastic getting a chance to work with you. We've obviously known each other online for a while, but it's awesome to see your good works. And how has it been in your first couple weeks here as part of Cover One?
It's been great just getting back to writing about the Bills in general, because I took like a year off. I interned for the Bills in 2018, and then I hosted a podcast for Bills Wire in 2019, which was a beloved podcast. Everyone loved the Kyle Silagyi Variety Hour. Nothing but rave reviews. There were no Apple reviews saying don't listen to this, listen to Cover One Buffalo instead. There was not any of those.
Key point.
But then I took 2020 off for the most part because just didn't really feel like writing about the Bills, and then COVID and everything just didn't have the oomph. But this year, good to be back, and it's also good to be doing it with you guys, two guys who I'm familiar with. Aaron, you and I have worked together in the past at Bills Wire. Greg, you and I have been friendly on Twitter for a long time, and just Rob Quinn's back too at Cover One, so that's good to be working with him again.
Yeah.
So it's just a lot of fun to be A, writing about the Bills again, and then B, doing it with a crew as respected as Cover One.
And I got to say, we have worked together, and I'll put that out there. When Eric, even, we were talking about this and bringing you on, I love the idea, because really your skill set really fills a hole that we were trying to look to fill for Bills fans. And if any of you out there don't know Kyle's work or haven't been introduced to Kyle, either you're not on Twitter or what, I don't know how you'd miss him. But the work you do is such a unique form of sort of the beat, being a beat guy, and you're not at the stadium, but you're still able to put out the same type of content. But you go a step deeper, in my opinion, than a lot of them, and go into some of the long form type stuff and break down stuff. And you also have the sense of humor to, kick off on Twitter and be a good follow. So it's not all just the raw stuff. So I thought this was a really good fit for exactly what we're doing. And outside of that, dude, I haven't worked with you at Bills Wire. You're one of the biggest grinders there is out there. And I don't know if people know, I'm the first one to give guys like you and people that put out articles constantly a ton of shit for all the content that you put out, but it's hard work to put out that much content. It's easy for me to get on in Twitter after I get on an hour a week and just talk for an hour and don't have to do the work. I don't know if people know what goes on behind the scenes, how hard you guys grind to put out that great content. So it's appreciated on our end.
So, and obviously in the comments here, we're already getting that Kyle Silagyi,
People asking for
variety hour crossover that we've been looking for.
I just want a mug that says
they
that
want
now,
it.
a little logo of the show.
So as we dive into it here, I know obviously tonight the reason that we decided to bring you on and introduce you to the Cover One Buffalo listeners was because one of your most recent interviews was with Harrison Phillips, and tonight is the defensive line position preview. So help us a little bit, talking about a guy who had high expectations, actually was playing really, really well, then blew out his ACL, worked really hard to come back, is one that similar comments we've heard from guys like Trent Murphy where, in your head, you're like, oh, if I work out twice as hard, I'll come back twice as fast, and realizing the human body doesn't quite work like that, and having to learn your way back and having some rough moments, and then I think a pretty strong finish to the season last year. What was it like sitting down with a guy like that and being able to talk through that kind of mental barrier besides just the physical recovery?
Yeah, so my biggest takeaway, I think, from my interview with Harrison Phillips was, as I mentioned before, I interned for the Bills in 2018. So I was just this college kid, and he was, in a lot of ways, just this college kid, fresh out of Stanford. So I remember, talking to him in the locker room, and he was just kind of like this timid, kind of nervous guy. Really didn't, he was confident. He thought he should have been there, but he also wasn't, like a leader by any means. He was just very much just, he mentioned this in the interview. It was just all about vetting other people and, picking things from other people and just, ears up, don't talk, and just learn that way. And now talking to him this year, going into year 4, he is just, granted, my interactions with him years ago were very limited, but he just seems like a completely different person. He seems like a leader. He seems like someone who is very happy to be a Buffalo Bill, knows what it takes to be a Buffalo Bill. He mentioned that a lot of times in our interview, just that's what the offseason is about for him at this point. He thinks that's one of the main things that you have to do in the offseason for him is teach other people what it means to be a Buffalo Bill. So he's really taken a hold or taken pride in the fact that he is a leader on this Buffalo Bills team. And then you mentioned, Greg, the whole Trent Murphy thing, working twice as hard to get back. Hopefully you'll get back twice as faster. I was blown away when he told me that after he got surgery on his ACL tear, he was in physical therapy the next day. And he did not take a day off until the start of the season because he wanted to get back. And obviously that's not going to work. He got back, but as we saw last year, he did admit it. He wasn't playing that well. He was just kind of making mental errors more than anything. And then just his body wasn't really answering to what he thought he could do physically. He brought up that you really can't replicate in training what it takes to be a defensive lineman. You can jump up on a box and your body can take, your legs can take the body weight. That's one thing. But now imagine being in the trenches and taking on 2 330-pound guards. You just can't replicate that in training unless you're hanging out with, 3 Harrison Phillips. But Harrison Phillips, again, jack dude now. I don't know if you guys have seen him.
Yeah, no, the body
Incredibly
transformation was real.
Yeah, but just, again, he worked so hard in that offseason, and it did pay off because he stayed at One Bulls Drive throughout the entire pandemic, or not the entire pandemic, but, the entire pandemic offseason, if you will. So he stayed there, worked hard, got on the field, but that didn't really translate into results, unfortunately. And he said that being made inactive for the 4 or 5 games that he was made inactive last year really helped him out because he finally got a chance to just sit down and relax and rest, which is something he didn't allow himself to do. So then I think as the season progressed, as he got back into the lineup, he was getting a higher snap percentage as the season went on. I think he played in 50% of the snaps in each of the last 2 playoff games, the defensive snaps. So he's a guy who this team obviously has a lot of faith in, and he's a guy who takes pride in that faith being in him. So it's good to see that everything finally appears to be, Simpsons reference here, coming up Millhouse for Harrison Phillips. Everything finally appears to be going his way. He's healthy, the team likes him, and he's ready to go.
Yeah, and I think when you look at a guy like this, I mean, if you could make a process mold of a player, it's going to be come out Harrison Phillips. And he does everything exactly what you want, what Sean McDermott's looking for off the field and in the preparation and in that training and doing those things. And you saw the progress, like you mentioned, that he talked about as he was getting more snaps as the season went on. And you saw the production start to increase and his impact on the game increase as the season went on. Definitely a player trending in the right direction. This is going to get a little tricky, and Greg and I will probably dive into this a little bit more here. The numbers get a little tricky here going forward. You have Star Lotulelei coming back. Not that he's going to take snaps from Harrison, but you have Ed Oliver is still also a player on the rise and still eating up the share of the snaps at the defensive tackle position. It gets a little hairy for him this season, now coming back fully healthy, having missed a season from an injury. This is the most important season of his career, and I know you can say that every season's the next one, but this is really his chance to make the Bills say, hey, this is a guy worth continuing to be an investment in our future, that we're maybe going to invest with an extension going forward, and we're not going to look to address this, position any further because we got Ed Oliver and Harrison Phillips, and we can roll with some of this youth and bring in guys. Do you think he's up for that challenge of having all the pressure on him this year to prove to the Bills that he's worth the investment they made in him when they drafted him?
I think he's, like I don't see any scenario in which he wouldn't be up for that challenge, just because he does just come off as just such a, as you said, just a process guy, just a guy who's so in love not only with football but in love with being a Buffalo Bill and is in love with the process, which is kind of a cliche thing to say, but that's how it comes off genuinely. Just a guy who really, as I said, takes pride in being in that building all summer, in being there and talking, not only, getting extra reps, training, interacting with the coaches that are there, but also helping the young guys that come in. Like he was saying how Greg Rousseau and Carlos Basham, they've already kind of come up to him and, taken a few things off of him. So he, obviously that's just his off-field impact, but on the field, he is going to have to stay healthy, which I think this was his second ACL tear 2 years ago. So like, I think he was out of there's like a 2-year window or whatever in which it's more likely you re-tear your ACL. So obviously he's in year 2 now. So let's hope that doesn't happen again. But again, the team likes him, and he did see his snap percentage increase last year. And the only reason why it decreased and that he, was made inactive, I think it's because he burned out. I think it's because he got in his head and he was like, I can't let myself lose this opportunity. And then when he just finally took a deep breath and just relaxed, he got back on the field and he was starting to again look like that player we saw in 2019 who we thought was actually, developing into the player that he was advertised to be. So I do think he is up for that challenge of taking on a bigger role this year and turning into a player who's worthy of being re-signed. Now, obviously, as you said, that's a numbers game. Will he be re-signed? I don't know. They got Vernon Butler under contract, Star Lotulelei, Ed Oliver. If he takes that step that we want him to make, he's up for an extension, not sooner rather than later, but eventually. His money would factor into
the fifth year option choices next year.
Right. So I don't know if he will be a player who ultimately gets an extension, but I think hopefully, if this pans out the way that all sides want it to, then he'll be a guy who's able to take that step.
So the way you're talking, though, I think we can call him Kyle Williams light, maybe now.
He's more jacked, so you can call him Kyle Williams heavy.
Yeah, I was just thinking from a production standpoint. I didn't want to put him on Kyle Williams level,
Yeah, the poor guy's had to carry that since the moment he got drafted.
Yeah. He has. I remember him the final. Again, like this is the third time I've dropped this, but 2018. The day that Kyle Williams announced his retirement and there was media availability, everybody wanted to talk to Harrison Phillips. So everyone was kind of around his locker, and he wasn't there. And I remember being like, where is this guy? Like, come on, this is Kyle Williams. This is the guy you were compared to all year. You're not going to talk about this. Like, what's going on? He wasn't in his locker because he was at Kyle Williams' retirement speech crying. And I was like, this guy. This is a good guy right here.
That sounds about right. All right, well, as we kind of get ready to dive into our full defensive line, obviously you did a great deep dive, and you guys will be able to check it out. I'll put the article in the show description here, wherever you're viewing it on YouTube or on the podcast platform of your choice. what other thoughts do you have as far as the overall defensive line and maybe any hot takes for Bills fans to be ready for?
I like the defensive line for the most part. Obviously wasn't overly productive last year in terms of getting consistent quarterback pressure. Wasn't especially effective against the run, in my opinion. But I like the guys there. I'm not crazy. I wasn't crazy about Greg Rousseau, but now as we are getting closer to the season, you can sell me on the idea of Greg Rousseau more now than you could have pre-draft, which is whatever, fan bias. I don't care.
I do it too.
Yeah, you can sell me on Greg Rousseau right now.
It took me 17 days to go from hating Josh Allen to loving him. It was fun.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, yeah, that's what you got to do. Carlos Basham, I like. We talked about F.A. Obata pre-show, who is a very intriguing player. We already talked about the defensive lineman. Ed Oliver is a player who I really hope takes that leap this year, because on my podcast years ago, I said that, Tremaine Edmonds is good, Tre'Davious White is good, but Ed Oliver is going to be the face of that defense. That hasn't panned out so far. Yeah. But hopefully this can be the year that it does happen. And I also said this pre-show, however much time you guys are going to devote to talking about Daryl Johnson tonight is not enough time. Daryl Johnson needs to be talked about more. I don't, for what reason? Again, he's a good lip syncer. He's an intriguing skill set, good special teamer, and he had a really good play against the 49ers last year. So that's all you need to know about why Daryl Johnson is a roster lock.
And we apologize. We had technical difficulties. We don't know what happened with Kyle. We needed to know. But make sure you guys check out Kyle and everything that we have going on there. Obviously, some awesome work and someone that we're really excited to have as part of the team here. So make sure you're checking it out. Kyle, we do wish you all the best. And
I actually got dropped. I was about to leave.
No, we appreciate it, man. Make sure you're checking out all of his work. Let the people know where to find you.
You can find Daryl Johnson on Twitter at, I don't know his at, but you can find me on Twitter at Kyle Silagyi, Silagyi. You should figure out how to spell Kyle if that was the one that was giving you trouble there.
I just want to note it. Greg is always better with the enunciation of names and being able to new players that we sign. I just let him go first. I was a lot close. I didn't pronounce your name exact, but I was a lot closer than Greg was last week.
You can just say it's because you were a fan of the Kyle Silagyi Variety Hour.
That's right. I listened to it for years.
Exactly.
I was a Patreon or something.
The people loved
it. The people love it. There was a high demand. All right, man, Kyle, we appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon. Keep up the good work. All right. It has been fun seeing, especially the chemistry with him and Rob coming over together and being able to work through everything there. I'm really excited to see everything they do through camp and leading up to the season. But let's talk about this defensive line. Obviously, people threw out the comments last year, highest paid defensive line in the NFL, and then all of a sudden you fall short. There are some metrics that got thrown around where there was better production than maybe what it looked like. The pass rush win rate, the ability to bring pressure actually graded out pretty well. They had the lowest time from snap to throw in the entire NFL. Quarterbacks got the ball out the fastest against the Bills of any team in the league. I don't think that's an accident. But that's all to say, you don't spend all of this money and all of these draft picks for pressures. You want sacks. You want production. And I am cautiously optimistic that we're going to see a better defensive line across the board. We'll talk about, there's a couple areas we could take a step back, but I think there's more areas where we could take a step forward.
Yeah, to me, this feels like a position group that we could talk about. First of all, I hated the losing Quentin Jefferson. I know some people didn't mind him going. I thought he was a really solid player. I think that's going to be tough to replace what I think he can do in this defense. Obviously, they brought some guys in that could maybe be able to fill that role and do some of those things. But I think the floor, and this goes back to what we've been talking about since free agency. I think the floor is relatively the same as they were a year ago. You're getting Star Lotulelei back and obviously not retiring with the news today that he will be speaking tomorrow. And it won't be hopefully a retirement announcement.
It could be a retirement announcement. You never know.
Sure, we've seen crazier things. But so you have some subtraction, some addition, but I think your floor is relatively the same. And I agree with you that I think it's a little bit deceiving when we talk about the lack of production, and we're specifically talking about sacks. I agree that we need to see more of that. There are some opportunities there, just like in every football season, there's more opportunities. There's a lot of meat on that bone, but they were getting pressures, and this was a top 10 DVOA defense. And that doesn't happen if you're really weak at a certain area. And that's what I look at this defense as a whole, is not any one particular stat. Yes, I want to see interceptions improve. Yes, I want to see sacks improve. I think those things will come with what Sean McDermott likes to talk about, time on task. And we saw the pressure starting to get better as the season went on, and that unit start to gel a little bit more during that really nice run they had. So I think the floor is at least the same. And if these rookies here that we're going to talk about in a minute come in and are maybe a little bit further ahead than we think they are, then this could be a much different unit and a much more productive unit. But I think at the least we're going to see a floor that's pretty similar with a bigger body. We're getting Star back, so at least you have that bigger body that you struggle to find somebody for, not necessarily a space eater, but a bigger guy.
Let's stay there at defensive tackle. So we talked about Harrison Phillips, talked about Star Lotulelei, which obviously we say in jest about the retirement thing. I think people, when you have somebody who opted out and then didn't show up for OTAs, I get the speculation. I think it was kind of silly that people all of a sudden started taking leaps of wondering whether he was going to play or not. But I'd be lying if I didn't maybe have a hair up on the back of my neck being like, for how he's talked about it, I did kind of think he was going to be at the OTAs. I'm glad that's put to bed. He's going to be at minicamp starting tomorrow. He's going to be made available to the media. And we've obviously seen multiple workout videos. And then who was it that talked to John?
John Scott, I think.
Yeah, John Scott talked to a guy that he was training with out there in Utah. So, obviously you can tell he's been preparing himself and getting ready for this.
Like an NFL veteran.
Correct. Like a veteran NFL player would every single offseason. It's crazy. So, Vernon Butler hasn't been there yet. Looking to see him. Vernon Butler took a pay cut this year. That's the reason he's on this roster.
Towards the had some better play.
Yeah, he had a stretch of pretty solid play that was exciting and looked good. He might have trended down a little bit again at the end, but he looked better in the second half of the season. I thought there was some potential there. Harrison Phillips is a guy that if we can get back to that player that was taking reps from him into that Bengals game in early 2019 and was starting to take snaps from Star, maybe we have something here. We didn't get that guy back last year. I love the person Harrison Phillips is, NFL Man of the Year nominee, great off the field, obviously great in the locker room. I think probably Josh Allen's closest friend on the roster, and I like the idea of him being there. He has to bring more to the table because being an undersized one tech who's not fast enough to be a three tech isn't enough. He has to show that he has that power. And Kyle talked about it in the interview, and I've seen the clips and the videos of him. He looks bigger and stronger this year and is a second year out of ACL. I'm interested there. Trayvon Hester signed with the team. I don't really see a path for him, and Justin Zimmer was a great story last year. I'm going to be surprised if he finds a path, and we'll talk about why when we get to the defensive ends. But, I think it's pretty clear-cut that Starr, Ed Oliver, Vernon Butler, and Harrison Phillips are the four defensive tackles here. Oliver and Butler rotate at three tech. Starr and Harrison rotate it at one tech. And when we don't need a one tech on the field, we're going to have plenty of defensive ends who can kick inside and take up those snaps. Do you think there's much of a chance at a surprise out of those four?
No, I think that the only surprise I could see is maybe Ertz thing falls through, that you're not able to land that. Maybe you don't get that cornerback, and you bring in another body.
Sure.
A Jarrell Casey, somebody like that comes
Kawan
in.
Short, Jarrell Casey, Geno Atkins. Yeah, there are veteran names out there that I'd welcome.
And would push one of these guys down. Other than that, we're looking at this team right now. Yeah, I think that's probably where you're rolling. I think we're both going into this assuming 9 is the sweet number for this Buffalo Bills defensive line. Although, like we were saying pre-show a little bit, you talk about those 9 linemen, but even these guys that we're talking about are maybe cut candidates or guys that are going to end up back on the practice squad. They played 14 dudes, and 11 of those guys last year had substantial snaps, at least throughout different games. So there's going to be even guys that get cut or end up on the practice squad are likely to rotate in and have some substantial playing time here. And it could be, some of these interior guys, as Zimmer. I'm not sure, I know Bills fans like him, and I think there's probably some NFL teams that he got on their radar from his play last year, but I don't know that he's the kind of player that he's off the Bills, that he's immediately scooped up league wide. I think he might be able to come back and be a guy that you see take reps because somebody's injured late in a year.
Yeah, if you look at the list, and we'll go through all the names later on, but there's 16 names currently under contract with the Bills. There's only 4 that are easy cuts in my mind. Yeah, obviously, Brian Cox Jr., Trayvon Hester, Brandon Bryant, Mike Love. I don't think any of them have any realistic path to a roster. Anyone besides that, you can tell me a story where Justin Zimmer, Daryl Johnson, any of those guys, obviously FA Obata, we'll talk about a little bit here, could make this roster. And that when you're talking about 12 guys that realistically could make the roster, that's tough in an NFL locker room when Bean is trying to figure this out. Last year, the only guy who did get claimed was Vincent Taylor. Offensive and defensive linemen are by far the biggest position to get claimed by other teams. It's still way lower than fans think. Taylor was the first Bill to get claimed in 3 years. It's just not that common of a thing. But this is a group that, whether it's the claim or Ron was talking about it in the spot here in the chat here, that could be a spot where you see the cut down day trade deals that Brandon Bean likes to make. Maybe that's where we see somebody get cut there. But with this defensive tackle group, I think everything is it's a group where I can see people saying, oh, we didn't get any better, and that because we didn't add a Geno Atkins or a Quan Short or a Jarrell Casey, or I know Joe Marino brought up Mike Purcell as like a true one tech kind of guy. We didn't add anybody
because
like
Star's
that.
not. I think that's another thing we want to talk about with fans here, that Star's not really traditional one tech. He's done it for a Sean McDermott style defense, but he really isn't what you necessarily want as a real one tech.
Yeah, he plays at like 310. He plays because he has a very stout core. He doesn't have a belly. He's not a Pat Williams or a Sam Adams or a Ted Washington. He's never going to look like that.
Yeah, and he also doesn't absorb multiple block. Like, he's not that guy.
It's he does well to hold at the point of attack,
right?
But he actually does better in like he's very good at getting the 1 yard of penetration and then holding up versus like taking on, and he'll eat double teams here and there. But it's just something where he has the veteran presence to be able to be there. The run defense was much better with him than it was without him.
Yeah.
And he's very good at keeping linebackers clean, but he's not a dominant run defender. He's not a dominant player. It's more the domino effect that he has. What we're going to need is for him to show that he did well, maybe, and even maybe benefited at his age of 32, having a year off to just let his body heal and get right for one last run here. What we need is for that to happen, and for Harrison Phillips to take a step forward in his second year from ACL and being bigger and stronger, to ultimately open up what they really need at this position, which is Ed Oliver's third-year leap that he needs to make. We saw flashes. We saw little bits of flashes the first year. You remember the Thanksgiving game against Dallas. We saw more flashes down the stretch last year, kind of muted by the fact that he had to play one tech and play out of position for longer stretches. We need him to now be 100% three tech, penetrating, havoc-wreaking, just menace in the backfield. And that's going to happen because Starr and Harrison Phillips can take all the one tech reps and take up some double team, some attention, and let him just be himself. That's the leap forward we need, is that the 2021 version of Ed Oliver is the injection of talent we didn't have before, because he can now really take that leap forward we need him to.
Yeah, I think there's a chance that fans just remain frustrated with Ed Oliver, because I don't know if he is going to be the type of player that creates a type of havoc that like an Aaron Donald. That is what people want in Ed Oliver to be. I don't think he's ever going to be an incredibly productive stat-filling, wrecking type of guy.
And just to be clear, no one's going to be Aaron Donald, but I wouldn't mind Geno Atkins. I wouldn't mind that. Hey, he has a 10-sack season here or there.
I don't care about sacks. I really don't. I want pressures. I want him to get to the quarterback and get sacks, but I don't. I think Ed Oliver is incredibly productive at wreaking havoc without getting necessarily the production. A lot of other guys will absorb some of that production. But I agree with you that I want him in his true position because I think he can even wreak more havoc. I don't know that it will necessarily lead to a higher production. It should, right? He should be able to get more than he's had for sacks so far in his career. But I don't need it to be a double-digit season. I just need him to create that havoc naturally from a position where he's maybe facing more one-on-ones, or you're going to go with one guy blocking a Harrison Phillips or a Star Lotulelei, and he'll be able to control the run a little bit more or something.
Well, look at the example you mentioned about it doesn't have to be sacks. I agree completely that if that's the case, the player I kept yearning for and talking about online was Jurrell Casey. This past year, Ed Oliver, including the playoffs, had 37 pressures. Casey was hurt last year. The 2 previous years, he had 57 and 64.
Right.
Now, it doesn't. He did that with, I don't remember off the top of my head. I think one of the seasons might have been 8 sacks and the other one was 4. But if you're getting me 64 and 7 pressures, I don't care
and you
how
destroyed
many sacks
the Bills
you're getting.
those seasons back
that
then.
One
too,
game against Tennessee, he just absolutely ate us alive.
Right.
If Oliver is doing that and just a constant presence in the backfield and having pressures all the time, and that, one of the seasons it's an 8 or 9 sack year,
run plays,
yes, blow up a run, get his tackle for loss. That's what I want, is just a noticeable presence all the time.
And that's what I see for the step forward for him. And it's sort of a maybe try to brace some of the fans that their expectations are going to be that he just jumps off the stat sheet this year and becomes some all-pro guy. He might not ever get that recognition because of the type of player he is. But I think that I've seen enough of him wreaking havoc and even doing so playing out of position that I have full faith. And if they are able to move him around a little bit and play him to more true how they want him to, that they're only going to increase that ability for him to be a guy that just comes in and wrecks plays. You saw it a number of times. Search Eric Turner's or Cover One's Twitter handle and type in Ed Oliver, and you'll see so many disruptive plays where he doesn't show up anywhere on the stat sheet, but Ed Oliver gets in there and disrupts quarterbacks to throw a bad throw or mess up a run lane and the guy's got to bounce it out and it's a tackle for loss by somebody else. He's that kind of player, and I can't wait. I'm getting super excited just talking about him now because I do think that step forward's coming. And I think a lot of it has to do with exactly what you said. I thought you set this up fantastic, that addition to the defense is going to be the guys next to him playing better that allows him to play to his full potential.
Yeah. And there's small pieces where this isn't the reason he's good, but when you're having some level of frustration, some level of criticism, when you watch Ed Oliver play and you break down film, that I will admit I'm not good about watching games live and being able to take my eyes off the ball. I just can't. It's just not naturally how I watch a game. I don't get to that until my second and third rewatch. And I'm still not as good at doing that as people like Eric and stuff like that.
Like Eric.
But I at least bang through and watch each game 3 times minimum, sometimes 4, because I'll go through and then I'll watch position groups. When you watch Ed Oliver, it doesn't matter. Obviously, the Bills we didn't get blown out very much. We were winning most of our games. His effort level is the same all the time. Plays that are away from the ball, where he's realistically not going to chase the guy down and tackle him, he's still sprinting to the ball every single snap. And a defensive tackle, that's not the position that you most commonly see that. He plays with a high energy level and a high motor all the time. And I think things like that, plus his maturation and his ability to build and to get his body now fully ready and being there to work out all the time, and now having the guys back next to him, and maybe we'll get to it here in just a second, maybe a little bit more coming off the edge than what he had before. I think we're going to see a step forward from him that, you're right, people were always way, way off there in the ultimate level that he could get to. But I don't think a level like a Geno Atkins where it's, hey, consistently thought of as one of the better defensive tackles and makes a Pro Bowl and is talked about really highly in that realm, even if it's not this game-wrecking, crazy guy, because, arguably Aaron Donald's the best football player in the world right now. That just was always unrealistic. It was simply because, oh, look, he's also
a little undersized.
A 6'1", 290-pound defensive tackle. We got one of those too. So that was always horribly unfair. He's simply a freak of nature that most humans can't do those things. But let's switch over to the other side of the ball, and this is where it gets really exciting, because at the defensive end position, the Buffalo Bills have under contract Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, Gregory Rousseau, Efe Obada, AJ Epinesa, Carlos Basham Jr., Daryl Bam Johnson, Brandon Bryant, and Mike Love. Out of that group, Brian Cox Jr., Brandon Bryant, Mike Love, those guys probably don't have a realistic shot here. There are 6 other defensive ends who are all really good and deserve to make an NFL roster. What in the world are we going to do with 6 defensive ends?
Well, we kept 4 tackles, right? So we only got to...
I think 5. I've gone through it a couple times. There is a non-zero chance that they keep 10. There is a chance that it's not going to be because it's defensive lineman, but in the sense that, what do you call Tywan Jones? What do you call Tyler Medikevich?
Right, yeah, sure.
There's a chance Daryl Johnson is that 52nd, 53rd guy for special teams, and it just ends up looking like a 10th defensive lineman. But I do think it's 9, and even with that, there's still not that many spots. Jerry Hughes is a lock. Mario Addison, now with his contract, is a lock. Gregory Rousseau, obviously just drafted. AJ Epinesa, Carlos Basham. That's 5 locks, and that leaves you Efe Obada and Daryl Johnson as a 6th, 7th guy fighting for a spot. It's really hard to find the math in this position.
Yeah, it's tough numbers, and they're also versatile guys, which doesn't make it easy for the guys behind that when you get the guys up top with your rookies they drafted being versatile. And here's the tough part about this is I like Obada quite a bit. Yeah. Before the draft, I was comfortable with him being a nice part of this rotation and hoping Epinesa takes a step forward, and you have Hughes and Addison are your vets, and they're able to come in and start, but you have a nice healthy rotation. With some young guys, and I was sold myself on that, and I wasn't mad when they had 1 defensive end in the draft, and then taking 2 just really slapped me in the face of Efe Obada just can't make this team, in my opinion, just because of a numbers game. And this is a player that I don't think you can find a way to bring back on your practice squad. I think he just has too much upside in his just size.
He would absolutely get
production that he's already put up in the NFL. So this is a tough one. This might be your cut day trade.
He's by far
candidate.
Both contract and talent.
Yeah,
he's by far the most logical fit. It's a $1.5 million deal. It's very palatable. He has enough film out there. He is the guy
put together a nice summer for himself with preseason games.
Yeah, if he has a couple flashy I joke about it as he'll win the A.J. McCarron Award of getting traded before he ever suits up for a regular season game for the Bills. But it's that kind of combination that I would expect, because I guess there's maybe a chance that someone would trade for Daryl Johnson, but he's probably more so the guy you would wait to get cut and then claim. I do think that Obada is a guy that would get traded for, 1, because the contract's already very palatable, and 2, because you would be worried about how many other people will be there. Right. And John, who is on all the time with us, we appreciate his support so much. Injuries will also be a factor. That,
absolutely.
If somebody gets hurt, all of a sudden there's a spot. That's why you go into camp with 16 linemen. That's why you go in with 12 NFL caliber ones, because if somebody gets hurt, you can't be there. And I do want to bring up something. Richard was asking some good questions in the chat. Based on the pay cuts and the restructure, it wasn't actually a base salary restructure, how people use the term, but a lot of guys took pay cuts and converted it into incentives that would hit next year, or just took pay cuts. In order to do that, they also had more of their salary guaranteed. So if they wanted to cut a Vernon Butler or a Mario Addison, it would have been before they did those things. Now there's almost no savings by cutting those guys, and anything that looks like savings is really just because you can prorate part of the dead cap hit to next year. So by cutting them, all you're doing is borrowing some of next year's cap space. You're not actually saving anything. So you're better off getting the value we can for them. I would have been fine with Addison or Butler getting cut before we restructured them. You and I and Eric were both on the train of, hey, if we're going to keep somebody, keep Quentin Jefferson, not those guys.
Right.
So it wasn't exactly what we expected to happen, but for all the people that are out there saying, oh, why don't we cut Starr or cut Addison or Butler? Cutting Starr costs us more than keeping him. Addison and Butler, we just don't really save anything because we guaranteed what they have left.
Yeah, totally. And to go back to that injuries point, I think this is kind of goes in line with what we were just talking about of having played 14 guys at defensive line a year ago. And, I think it does become a numbers game that maybe there's a chance for a guy like Obata to maybe they end up keeping 10 and there's other positions where they know that they can sneak guys in. Kyle. Yeah, Mark Ryan agrees with him too. You definitely trade for Johnson. Here's what I'll say about Daryl Johnson is I don't think he's a trade candidate, and I also think he'd be pretty easily put back on your practice squad. I don't know that there's a lot of Daryl Johnsons all across teams in the NFL. I don't know that he's a guy that teams are itching to get their hands on. I think there's a lot of those types of players. He's got nice size and he's shown some special teams.
That would be it, is that a team thinks that they could get the special teams reps and they see the
capitalize on the size.
What 6'7",
but that's what I'm saying.
2'7", whatever it is.
Yeah, every team you talk to fans of other teams, they all have some guy floating around in the bottom of their roster or practice squad that's 6'6", 6'7", is a freak, but hasn't panned out yet. And that's who Daryl Johnson is for us. And I hope that he flashes and that at the end of the summer we're having a harder conversation about who to keep. But I think a lot of these decisions for Brandon Beane, not just on the defensive line, is gonna, come down to who do I think is gonna clear waivers? Who do I think can I get back on this team? Because a lot of these guys you're gonna need if you're gonna play 14 defensive linemen. They're probably guys that are on your roster now that are either gonna come back through the practice squad or go out to the street and end up back. We see it every year. Guys coming back and forth on and off practice squads. Antonio Williams last year, I think he went on and off the practice squad 5 or 6 times before coming back full time for the year. So I do think, this bottom of the roster, get used to these guys, because I think you'll see even the guys that necessarily don't make the roster, I think they'll be around one Bills drive going forward. I can't see a lot of them except for Obata necessarily ending up anywhere else.
Yeah. Obviously guys like Brian Cox Jr., Mike Love, they've floated around and been on other teams.
I don't even know if they're practice squad eligible still or not. I haven't looked that up.
So this year is one thing that I learned when I looked it up and was trying to research it, whether the rules carried over for this year. They didn't need to, because when the CBA amendment was done, it was automatically for 2020 and 2021. So stuff like the 3-week IR, unlimited use of IR, 16 practice squad spots, including no maximum on veteran versus rookie, the unlimited usage of practice squad, that covers both years. And I've heard that there's momentum to keep that permanently, that it's the NFLPA likes it, and that teams like the flexibility. So that's usually a pretty easy win-win. So for sure for this year, there's going to be no limitation on the amount of veterans on the practice squad. They can hide people with that IR and pull them up 3 weeks at a time, which basically means there's no value to the pup anymore, because you can put a guy in the IR and bring him back whenever you want.
Yep.
So stuff like that,
which really should just be how it is.
Correct. And we've seen 2 years in a row they did it with Vojon Joseph and then with Isaiah Hodgins, and they kind of messed around with hey, here's a couple extra bucks to go wait in the parking lot for Andre Roberts, the way they did last year. We could see some of that kind of stuff. And, that's one where, say, God forbid, Carlos Basham has a little something that he gets dinged up. That's one you do with F.A. Obata, where you tell them, hey, we got to keep Basham on the 53 and then put him on IR. But if you could just wait out in the parking lot for a minute, we'll give you an extra $25,000 to hang out for a minute, and then we'll just re-sign you back real quick and give you the same money. He's the guy that probably would make the most sense out of this group to do that with.
Yeah, and that's my thing is where, we get towards this time of year and we start looking at the roster and you say, oh, there's no way this guy can make the team. The numbers just don't work. They mentioned injuries, anything that happens there, all kinds of fluky stuff, playing with rosters, unsure of who you can bring back on practice squad. All this stuff matters. Every year, teams surprise us by keeping an extra player at a positional group that they tend to not do at another positional group. Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane talk about it every time. Every single team is different. So it's easy to go back and historically look and say, okay, every year they've kept 9 at this position, 6 at this position. At some point, you're gonna have a different team with some different talent that's gonna force you to make a decision. Okay, well, hey, we can trade Obata for scraps, or we can keep him and get some production this year. We saw them do that with Trent Murphy. Obviously, it was a COVID season, but the idea of having some concept of some known production versus unknown, Brandon Beane tends to roll with the known. And so you're not going to cut these rookies. But if these guys come into camp and they're not as ready as people think, and, we haven't really even talked about the impact of the rookies yet, but I'm not sold that Basham is this insert pro-ready defensive end that I think our fan base is selling him as. If these guys aren't ready, that's why I like the F.A. Obata signing so much and bringing him in, because I think he is a guy that's ready to hit his ceiling in the NFL and has shown some production already, which we haven't seen from these rookies. So that would be my concern, is if the numbers game puts out a guy that could be a proven productive pass rusher, that's the kind of thing that hurts you late in a season with an added game now too.
So we'll start at the bottom. We already talked about Cox Jr. I don't think there's much chance for Mike Love, guys like that. When Jason here talking about the DJ is good for special teams, I do think the fact that I don't even think he's an average defensive end. He's a below average defensive end. He had more missed tackles than tackles last year. That's bad. You should never have a 50% missed tackle rate. That is obviously it's a small sample size, but he's not a good defensive end, and that he has 2 seasons, and a couple of those seasons a pretty legitimate amount of snaps. They've
tried to get him.
He played 225 snaps. That's not Brandon Bryant played 7. Mike Love played 35. You want to tell me those are too little of a sample size to make a decision? You're right. That probably is. Brian Cox Jr. played 23. Daryl Johnson played 225 snaps. We know that, and that's not special teams. That's defensive snaps.
Right.
We know he's not good. He's not a good defensive end. So maybe he takes some huge leap forward in year 3, but I haven't seen anything that tells me he's ready to do that. You then kind of switch over into some of the new additions that they brought in. I'm very intrigued by the things we've heard about AJ Epinesa, and that you go through there, adding in Gregory Rousseau and Carlos Basham. I like the way that Kyle framed that when we talked about him with Rousseau. I think we were the same way. That wasn't the guy we would have chose. Right. We weren't bashing him or saying it was some huge bust. It just wasn't the guy we would have picked. There were plenty of guys we had ahead of him. I've been really impressed with everything I've read, everything I've learned about him. I totally get why he's such a process guy, why they liked him so much. Really smart, really humble, very personable with everyone. The work ethic just shines through in everything. You hear Leslie Frazier talk about things like, hey, it's pretty rare to find a rookie that you could tell somebody once, and the first time you step on the field, he's already put it into action and can do it and simply visualize it and then do the thing that you just told him to do. He said there's veterans who can't do that. Those are the things you like to hear about a young, raw rookie who's got crazy size and dimensions and athleticism, but only played a defensive end for 1 season. That's what you want to hear. I'm intrigued by that combination. I'm not 100% on Basham. If people got a little overboard there, me included, about the, hey, maybe he's more ready to contribute than Rousseau is. I'm excited about the combination of Rousseau and Epinesa moving forward.
I am also excited about Epinesa and Rousseau moving forward. And I'm not trying to I'm not trying to bash Basham here at all, but I thought people came out a little hot with that. Yeah. He has some big time pro ready.
It was the complete counterbalance of, if Rousseau's raw, well, hey, at least we got this guy. It was complete defense mechanism.
Probably true, and I just don't know that he's a guy that's ready, and I don't know that Rousseau is, but I see the path for Rousseau a little bit more, and the dynamic that he adds to the defense that they don't have, and that is what intrigues me the most about seeing him. I thought it was silly post-draft how PFF tried to frame it that the way he got sacks was somehow less of a way to get sacks.
Playing defensive line with a high motor is a bad thing.
Yeah,
somehow.
And what we talked about at the top of this conversation was this team was not productive enough in sacks. And I'll tell you a lot of it. If you go back and watch this Buffalo Bills team from 2020, they pressured the quarterback. It shows up in every analytics of counting any types of pressures. Guys were getting out of the pocket, extending plays. There was pressure on QBs that didn't result in sacks. And some of that was because you had guys that just weren't finishing sacks, and that is exactly where Rousseau racked up his production in that 1 year at the University of Miami. So
yeah, those plays where it would have been nice to have a 6'7" guy with an 84-inch wingspan who could
just grab somebody,
reach over the offensive tackle and just finish a guy because he got pushed into him.
Or like you said with Ed Oliver, a guy that's motor just keeps
Yes.
him moving constantly and doesn't have him stop and can chase Patrick Mahomes across the field as he's extending a play. So all of that stuff, I think, you see in Rousseau, and you see, okay, I see why the traits excite Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. I can see those traits and how they would benefit this team. Basham feels to me like another rotational guy. I think he's probably got a decent motor. I think he's got a lot to learn in terms of processing the game, which makes me a little hesitant with the NFL ready label that I think
And
he was getting thrown
this
around.
talk they've had of, they're talking about him as though he's a defensive tackle. It's interesting.
Probably the Quentin Jefferson.
Every conversation is
role.
talking about internal, and he can even play inside on rundowns. Like, they're talking about him like a defensive tackle. It's weird.
Yeah, so that's one thing I'll be interested to see is where they're lining these guys up and what parts of the rotation that they're putting these guys in. But I'm excited, but this is where it gets really tricky with these numbers, man. You have Rousseau, who we just talked about, has all the real elite traits that you want and has a way to impact this team, and you want that impact sooner than later, but he just missed a season, as he is a young guy developing. That's pretty big. This is something we haven't seen a lot of, healthy players missing a season. This is going to be interesting to see how that impacts
21.
his rookie year. Yeah. I'm not sure if he's ready or not, but that's a little bit of a flag that I'm going to watch this summer. And then, like I keep saying about Basham, I don't feel that he's pro ready, and I think he needs time to develop. So it's not like these two locked roster spots on a group that's already tight. We're unsure that there's going to be production coming out of here, and it might be real limited production. You might only get 15 to 30% of snaps out of either one of these guys for the year when it's all said and done. So this isn't like you're guaranteed to keep two spots for guys are going to be huge productive players on this team. And so that, I don't know, man, that's why the possibility of an Obata staying on this roster, because this is going to be a tough thing for Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott to sort through this August when you're watching these guys and hoping that somebody takes the step up to make you feel comfortable staying at 9.
Well, and it's the Richard's comment here is exactly in line with where my head is. I think one, whether you want to talk about, we give a lot of crap to sites like PFF for their grading and things like that, but everything that we look at as well, AJ Epinesa basically played 2 different seasons.
Yeah.
And that whether you look at snap count, whether you look at, his ability to get on the field and then the production when he got on the field with pressures, with tackles, with his engagement on the field, just how much he was able to impact the game. It was like 2 different seasons, and that was all with him losing way more weight than what they wanted him to, struggling to put it back on during the season, and now being strong and ready to contribute. Well, last year when he was too light and not strong enough and not in the position he wanted to be, he was really good down the stretch. Like he had a lot of really nice games. I would encourage people, go back and watch that Denver game. Go back and watch that New England game, that Miami game towards the end of the year. He was making a lot of plays and flashing repeatedly. Now they talk about how he spent the entire offseason in Buffalo getting his body right. You heard Deion Dawkins talking about him. He looks great in the videos that you see. His body looks lean and strong. The reason that scuffle happened is because he picked off Josh Allen at the line of scrimmage and took it back for a touchdown. Just playing confident, playing ready. I'm excited to see him. I expect him to start. I think it's going to be Jerry Hughes and AJ Epinesa and Mario Addison coming in as a backup rotationally, Greg Rousseau coming in. And I think we see Epinesa and Hughes starting, and I think that we see a stronger rookie season from Gregory Rousseau than what many are predicting.
I'm excited for Epinesa, and I agree with what you said in terms of when we saw him last, trending in the right way. Yeah. I think this is a more magnified version of what we were just saying about Harrison Phillips in terms of a guy that really is, if anyone has been put on alert on this roster, I think that it's him with drafting 2 young defensive ends. I think that they're saying, hey, now's the time to really see if you can flourish, because he's at a pivotal point in his career where you have some youth now coming in behind you at this position where it could go either one of 2 ways, where he can either solidify himself as a real productive player, or he can become a guy that just gets lost in NFL roster shuffles because the numbers just don't work out. And yeah, he'll still make the team and stuff, but he just won't crack that sort of 25-30% of snaps with any consistency unless he proves it here in this offseason. I hope it's the case. I hope that he is the guy. It makes the future of this position a lot easier going forward, because I don't think Jerry has a lot of time left. I think Addison's about to wrap it up too. But I do think going into week one, I think Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison are your starting defensive ends. I think that will probably change throughout the year. I think somebody else will probably start to steal some of those reps. I think this team likes Addison quite a bit, and I think that they'll continue to give him that veteran respect. I think they lean into veterans and what they've had for production as much as they can until that job is just ripped from a guy. And they've been willing to make those changes in season all throughout McDermott's tenure here. But I think going into the season, we'll see Hughes, Addison. And so maybe we'll make a little friendly wager. I don't want to drink a Seagram's like Drew would make me, but I'll do something else.
We'll find something more reasonable.
Yeah, we're gentlemen, come on.
On who it's going to be. And I will say, Mario Addison was also better than fans realized last year. Like, I get it that we wanted more than the 5.5 sacks, but he did have 5.5 sacks. He did have 39 pressures on a pretty limited snap count. So, anytime that you're talking about 39 pressures in 368 pass rush snaps, if you're getting more than one pressure every 10 snaps, you're playing pretty well. So, don't get me wrong, I wanted a little bit more than that, but Mario Addison was not this trash player last year that everybody seems to have in their head that he was.
And the KC game, he was at 69, almost 70% of defensive snaps for that game. So he was a key piece in the most important game that they were playing a year ago on that team. And that's what I was talking about, that floor coming back, that you're bringing back at least a floor of a top 10 DVOA defense. And Mario Addison was a pretty substantial part of that. I think for the season, he was at 56% snaps, the second most snaps along the defensive line next to Jerry Hughes. So again, I know fans will look at the stats and say the defensive line performed poorly and it was a point of frustration at times throughout the year. But I think overall, when we look at the big picture and how the defense played, and some stats show that the defensive line wasn't necessarily as bad as maybe we wanted to make it out to be, and that guys like Addison have a role in 2021. I think I saw a couple comments here, I'm not sure from who, and maybe this is the kiss of death for Addison, me saying this, but people are saying he's the next Trent Murphy, or this year's Trent Murphy. And I don't know that that's true. I think that he's going into this year with a much more defined role of who they want. I think he's a more productive.
He was much better in 2019 or in 2020 than Murphy was in 2019.
Yes, I think he's what they wanted Trent Murphy to be. And then Addison is what a leader. We heard about it. Brandon Beane talking about after the draft. The first guy that is texting him is Mario Addison, talking about he can't wait to work with these young defensive ends. All that stuff matters, and I think that's why he's going to carve himself out a really nice role in 2021.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that there's things that we would like. And Jason brings up a good point here. There were a couple plays where Addison over pursued and would loop around and give up a run, and none more prevalent than on the Hail Mary play against the Cardinals. So I get some of the frustration. I just think he was not as bad as what people have made it out to be. He was a slight disappointment. He wasn't a good value for his contract. He was still pretty good. He was still a good player. He was an above-average player, to be honest. 5.5 sacks and 39 pressures is above average. That is better than the average defensive lineman. So, now it is also reasonable to look that we're also talking about a guy, Gregory Rousseau just turned 21. He was drafted at 20. Mario Addison just turned 33. That's not nothing. He'll turn 34 during the season. That's a guy that we need to be conscious of. But that's also why you have this depth here. It would make more sense for him to be a rotational guy that maybe doesn't play quite as high at the snap count and can have maybe a higher efficiency impact in a slightly reduced 45-50% of snaps instead of the 55, 60, 65% he was getting. I think that could be a good thing even. So as we kind of look to wrap this up here, we didn't talk about Jerry Hughes very much, and I think
because he's consistent. He's just I think you know what you're going to get with Jerry. I think he's got the same amount of juice left that he had a year ago. I think he was still showing juice that he's got at the end of the year. He's not perfect. He needs to finish sacks a little bit more, but he wreaks havoc. Just like I was talking about with that Oliver, he's one of these guys that just consistently wins. He's got great moves. He sets people up, and he's also got rid of a lot of the boneheaded bullshit that Jerry Hughes used to do and be known for. Now he's a team leader. Yeah, the Gary Hughes type stuff. So yeah, that's why we there's not a whole lot much more to say.
Yeah. And if I told you that last year was the second most pressures in Jerry Hughes' entire career, would that surprise you? Because it just surprised me when I looked it up.
Honestly, I feel like every single weekend at post-game show, we were talking about Jerry playing with his hair on fire and just getting, just having a really good season, and that it wasn't getting talked about enough because the sack totals weren't there. But I think every week he was disruptive in different ways and was a big part of that change in the defense toward after the bye week.
Well, so here's a couple things to look at. In the seasons when he was surrounded by Kyle Williams and Marcel Darius and Mario Williams, he did have 2 back-to-back double-digit sack seasons with 11 in each year. He had 61 total pressures in that season and 59 in the other season. Well, the difference of not having all those other amazing players around him, he had 66 total pressures last year. He had more hurries. He had just as many quarterback hits. He just had fewer sacks to finish. He had just as many, big plays from that standpoint and the big, stops or the behind the tackle line plays. It's being able to contribute there. Maybe this is the last hurrah for him because we don't have a lot left with Jerry.
Sure.
He's going to turn 33 just before the start of the season. This is right there in the last run. And if you needed any more evidence than that, they just drafted defensive ends with the first and second round pick. That obviously means there's not a huge plan in the future for Addison and Hughes. Maybe Jerry gets brought back one more year on a rotational kind of thing, but they're obviously planning for life beyond there. I would love to see this be the last hurrah for Jerry Hughes and to have probably cut back his snaps a little bit, let him stay fresh with all these young legs out there, but that it would be great to see him have an 8-sack season in fewer snaps and just consistently keep showing that pressure, just be in the quarterback's ear hole over and over and over again, creating pressure, making his presence known. I'm excited to see him play this year, and we need to brace ourselves. It might be Jerry's last year of football.
It might be. The hills come fast. Or guys fall off a cliff pretty fast at these ages. So it could happen this year, but to me, outside of age and what we historically know of football players, he shows no signs, at least when I watch him, slowing down. And I think that he's still got some of the best in the league in terms of creating pressures, and a lot of the stats show it. So I think there's no sign of him slowing down until we see it. So he's a guy I'm, again, interested to see. And I agree with you that I think they'll probably try to work his workload down, but I think he's still a player that can play the type of season. It's going to be hard to keep him off the field. Yeah, I think it's going to be hard. He's the best defensive lineman that we've talked about tonight on this team, and I don't think it's that close. I don't think there's a lot of guys that other defensive coordinators, that obviously they account for all of them, but when you play the Buffalo Bills and you break down each group, Jerry Hughes is one of the guys that they're always going to know where he is and what he's doing and how to stop him from wreaking havoc on their quarterback. And then they'll worry about the rest of the guys along that defensive line. But it starts with Jerry Hughes, and it's for a reason. And so he is going to be hard to keep off the field because some of these guys are going to take lumps learning. Even Epinesa still got stuff to learn. Like Jerry wasn't there at that point in his career either. So Jerry's got the perfect mix of being a vet and still having that juice, at least from the last time we saw him. So he's going to be a tough guy on this defensive line to keep off the field because I still think he's by far the best and most havoc-wreaking player that they have on this defensive line.
Well, I mean, Greg Roman and John Harbaugh talked about it after the Ravens playoff game that they knew they needed to account for him, and he still had 6 pressures and 2 sacks in the playoff game, even though he was their key guy on the protection plan. Right. So it's something that I get it that people get frustrated hearing us talk about, hey, Jerry created a bunch more pressures and was wreaking havoc, and they don't care because he didn't have a sack. And I would like him to finish more too, but it's just simply not as simple as what people make it out to be.
Totally.
So that kind of wraps it up for where we're at. This is an incredibly talented group. It's a group that's well paid. We're still a highly compensated defensive line. They've obviously invested a great deal in the future. We have some fun new additions, adding Obata, adding Rousseau, adding Carlos Basham, welcoming back Star Lotulelei, and hopefully a healthy Harrison Phillips. I think there's a chance this could be a improved defensive line without it needing to be a flashy name added. I think you could have multiple guys have better seasons this year who were on the roster last year, and that could be a really exciting combination altogether.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to be the sexiest group in the league. I think this is still going to be a group that frustrates fans. I think sacks, they're not going to be the top sack team in the league. I can see it improving. I think some of that stuff improving.
I'd like more.
Yeah, I think we'll get more, but I don't think that they're going to be a unit that blows the league open. But I think at the end of next year, again, I think Sean McDermott will probably have a top 10 DVOA defense, and we'll look at this defensive line and say, man, they were more productive than maybe it felt at times. I think when you pull back a little bit and you look at other teams, we get sucked into Bills and hyper focusing on our team and every player at every part of the roster and their good things and their failures. I think when you look at a lot of the other teams, those frustrations are all there across the league at certain groups, even though they played better. And I think this Bills unit is going to be one of those units for this team and this fan base where they're really, unless they are one of the top 3 defensive line units in the league, I don't think people will feel like they're getting their money's worth because you talked about how much is being paid. But I think that's more of the premium positions along that group than really anything else, and the ages where they got their players at as they were building this team, which makes that group so high paid. But I don't think they're going to live up to a cost. The production's never going to match the cost of this group, I don't think.
Well, and I think some people also, as we wrap up here, that wasn't as bad as even though we wanted more sack production, they were 16th in the league. They weren't 27th in the league.
Right, totally.
38 sacks was average. It wasn't even below average. It was dead even average.
Right.
16th in the league. And if they had 4 more sacks and just got to 42, they would have been 8th in the league. That's 1 more sack every 4 games, and they would have been top 8 in the league. So they were not far away. That's why when we talk about things like pass rush win rate, they had a very similar pass rush win rate as the Steelers, who had 56 sacks, which is awesome. But when you talk about the number of pressures, the number of hurries, how they affect the quarterback, they weren't that far off. It's just we need guys who can finish more frequently. So
right.
I'm really excited to see it. This is a group that I'm cautiously optimistic about. I think that we're going to see better production and more consistent impact, and I'm excited to see where that goes. So,
ton of pressure on Eric Washington. They just
loaded
a bunch of youth in his lap. He's got his hands full with some development of youth they've already given him. So this is a big year for him as a defensive line coach and that defensive coaching staff to really, like you said, take this whole line to the next level.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to see, and I can't wait to find out how it works. So tell the people where they can find you and what you have going on.
I got nothing going on. I was telling our friend Pat Moran, I'll be on his podcast. I'm not sure when it releases here coming up. And we talked a little defensive line and some of that stuff leading into this. But I told him I'm the least hardworking guy in the podcast game. So I'm not working on anything. I'll be here next week sometime talking to you. And you can find me on Twitter at AaronQuinn716.
So you guys can find me at Greg Thompson, hanging out with Bills fans on the Twitter sphere or in the Cover One Premium Slack channel. Sign up for a premium membership. Get to read the good work by people like Rob and Kyle and everybody. Join us in the premium Slack channel. Next week we'll be back for our linebacker preview, our last defensive position preview before we go into some coaching and front office work that we'll do the week after that. But excited to be able to see that. Make sure you guys are checking us out, finding us on the Twitter sphere or wherever you're at. But on behalf of Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Thompson, and you have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.